Profiles and Issues is a production of CTNY, the Catholic Television Network of Youngstown. It is a show that profiles people and issues that affect the church in the modern world. Your program host is Father James Korda.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Profiles and Issues. I'm Father Jim Korda. Our issue is Catholic Charities, and helping me to profile this issue is Brian Corbin. Brian, such a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Thanks, Father Jim. I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
What makes charity Catholic? Is that appropriate to say?
Sure, there's all kinds of levels to that. But let me start with, first of all, back in the early Acts of the Apostles, we read very early on in the 4th chapter that the community of apostles, after the resurrection, the community of apostles were gaining in number, and people would give some of their proceeds of sales of extra property or extra houses and give it to the apostles to share. And there's a really powerful line: there was no needy among them. And I think that's the essence of what Catholic Charities is. It was the heart of the church, and it was started in the church. And if you look a couple chapters later in the Acts of the Apostles, you see that there was a fight, that the Greek women were complaining that the Jewish women were getting more than they were. So the apostles got together, and the community decided to create what's called deacons, which was really part of diakonia, which is service. So I say the birth date of Catholic Charities is basically the 6th chapter of Acts, where the church itself decided to set up a structure to make sure that needy people are taken care of. So Catholic Charities today, we are the arm of the local bishop around the world. So every bishop has a form of Catholic Charities in his office, and it's the official church's way of reaching out to those in need. If you look at theologically, Pope Benedict, in his first encyclical, Deus Caritas Est, God is Love, talks about the 3 essential dimensions of the church: to be one of the proclamation of the word, to celebrate sacraments, liturgy, and to serve the needy. So Catholic Charities is one of the 3 pillars of the church as our understanding of word, worship, and service. So that's the rootedness of our faith and of Catholic Charities. So when you say Catholic Charities in the United States, each one of us is directly connected to the bishop. As a matter of fact, if you look around the country, I would say about 98% of those Catholic Charities boards, the bishop is the chairman. So that's the direct connection.
Why is the bishop so important in this whole process and celebration of charity to those who need it?
Sure. I think if you look at my understanding, I'm not a liturgist, but my understanding that in the very rite of making a man a bishop, ordaining a priest to become a bishop, in that very rite, they actually are called upon to take care of the needy in their care. So it's an essential promise that a man makes when he becomes a bishop to take care of the poor. So I think that's a very important function. Just recently, Father Jim, Pope Benedict, before he retired, literally put out what's called the motu proprio on Caritas. And I'm going to use the word Caritas and Catholic Charities interchangeably because around the world, the local Catholic Charities agencies are called Caritas agencies. We just happen to be unique in the United States. But be that as it may, the Holy Father put into canon law that right that I just said the bishop had a promise to as he became a bishop. They made that tiny sentence into now canon law, that the church is called upon directly to make sure that this happens, that Catholic Charities is a direct arm of the bishop.
Now let's bring that a step further. We are the church also. So how important is charity in the life of every individual Catholic?
Good point. I think a couple dimensions to that. One is if truly being of faith, being a church of faith, a community of faith, a church, we're called to celebrate the word, celebrate liturgy, to think about, to hear the word, to proclaim it, to celebrate Eucharist, to celebrate all the sacraments. We're also called as individuals to be in the world to care for our brothers and sisters. And think of all the powerful passages of Scripture. One, we have the creation story where we're made in the image and likeness of God, so immediately we know that each one of us are made in God's image. Then we hear through the law of the Old Testament, we keep on hearing about remember the alien and the stranger and the orphan and the widow. We hear that constantly in the first 5 books of the Old Testament, the Pentateuch. And then when you look at the New Testament, we hear these powerful stories of Jesus saying, well, when the Son of Man comes, Matthew 25, he'll divide the world into sheep and to goats, and he will say, when I was hungry and thirsty, you fed me, you took care of me. When I was a stranger, you welcomed me. When I was a prisoner, you visited me. When I was sick, you took care of me. And people will say, when do we see you, Lord? And the answer comes back, when you did it to the least of my brothers and sisters. Then you have the powerful story in the Good Samaritan of the Good Samaritan stopping to help a half-dead man, took care of him, brought him to the inn. And what was the inn? Maybe it's the church. Brought him to us. So deep in our DNA, as it were, as a Catholic faith system, we are called individually and corporately to be a neighbor to those in need.
And how has the church done in responding to the needs of people across the centuries and around the world?
Sure. Wow, 2,000 years and 30 seconds, so here it goes on that one. I think part of it is because, and I just want to make one distinction also. As the church grew from the Acts of the Apostles, it was directly linked to the Apostles, and during the Middle Ages, religious orders emerged. And actually before that, the Benedictines in the 6th century. But the orders of men and women truly were able to be as flexible as the church and to continue that ministry of service as well. So we have incredible orders of men and women who've done incredible work in social ministry connected to the local bishops. So they're always connected. So over time, if you look at that tradition, let's take the Benedictines for one moment, they created these huge monasteries, which were the first hospitals, hospices, and hotels. So right there, they started the institutions as well as the bishops dealing with the poor directly. So over time, what has happened is that, like I said, every bishop around the world has a Catholic Charities or a Caritas agency. Some are huge, some are small. It doesn't matter. They have something. So one of the biggest issues probably that we're probably most known for is immediate relief of hunger, visiting people in prisons. And if you remember back on Pope Francis's first washing of the feet, Holy Thursday, on his first one, he had just been made Pope. He actually went to a juvenile detention center to wash some kids' feet. That, again, is a kind of an image of that the church has been doing this for a long time. One of the major issues, I think, in the world right now is immigration and migration. And the Catholic Church is one of the few multinational organizations that are, again, in almost every country in the world, we're working on immigration. So we receive people, send people, and so I think there's this incredible connection of people. So we go from looking at what are the real specific needs of my locality. So a bishop's going to say, what's my needs in my area? Respond. But we also know we're connected to the national, and we're also connected globally, which is an incredible way to see the world in a local, global context constantly.
And what does that say about us in this global network? What does that say about us being connected?
Great point. I think two principles in Catholic social teachings to me come to mind. One is the call for the common good, and the other is solidarity. So the common good. We're called not only to serve people, but also to make sure that there are structures in place of justice so that people can live healthy lives. They don't have to necessarily have food banks anymore, that they actually have access to food. So that's the justice dimension. The other part of that dimension is also looking at how can we find a way that as a Catholic person, we can find a way to practically be in the world helping. And I think that's a call of spirituality, it's a call of our baptism, and it's a call of the global church.
Mm-hmm. There are so many needs that are out there. How does the church in Catholic Charities in this global network does it respond to every need, or are the needs so great that we can only do so much?
Sure. I think it's a little bit of both. I think as Catholic Charities, our DNA is to say, help everyone. But then that's where we have the corporal works of mercy, to feed the hungry, to give drink to the thirsty, visit the prisoners, welcome strangers, visit the sick, bury the dead. Those are kind of priorities. And what it boils down to, as I said with the Old Testament prophets, were the widows, the orphans, and the strangers. So I think that's the focus, even though we respond. In some dioceses, people respond very specifically to people who are hungry or who are going through housing foreclosure or who are new immigrants. I had the privilege of being with Caritas Jordan in the Middle East recently with Catholic Relief Services. They were focused on refugees from Syria, very specific set up camps and refugee settlements. So again, that's what they were focused on. They did nothing else, but they were just so focused. So again, there's that multi-dimension and a very specific dimension.
And obviously the need is so great that it demands kind of a global effort.
Absolutely.
It's just not us doing it, or it's not just not they doing it, but it's we doing it together. And so basically Catholic Charities is this large umbrella that all of the social services, if I could use that term, fit underneath. How do you determine what are the greatest needs? Is it just determined by what's going on in a particular area or region or something nationally? I
think a little bit of both. I think like if you were in Youngstown like we are, employment's a real big issue. So we always have to look at what are job creation, and sometimes we're good at it, sometimes we're not. But then we try to focus on that. We've also seen an increase in hunger amongst senior citizens, which is very disturbing. Now, that was not on anyone's radar screen 5-6 years ago. So as we look at our statistics of who's coming to us asking for basic help, we're seeing this need. So I think that somehow we get these calls of people and we start seeing what's happening, and then we can move our programs to be efficient as best as we can. But I think it's an iterative process. What is important here in Youngstown may not be important in Boston, and it may not be important in Jordan. And so I think that's the beauty of the church. It's both very local and flexible, and it's connected globally. So if they're having crisis of migrants and refugees in Syria, trust me, we're going to have issues of migration and refugees in the United States from Syrians. So I'm just saying that we're going to be connected no matter what. So even though we might think we have a priority set up, all of a sudden a world event will change those priorities.
We're coming down to the last few minutes of our first segment. Where does the word justice play into all this?
Sure. The mission of Catholic Charities is threefold: to provide services, which we've really been talking about, to work for the transformation and humanization of structures, and to convene the church and others to do the same. So let me talk about the second one, to transform and humanize structures. That is the whole call for Catholics and institutions and people of goodwill to work together to say, hey, why do we have senior citizens who are more hungry? We need to figure out what's going on. So the concept of justice is to figure out what are the structures in place, and we've seen cuts in Medicaid or cuts in different issues. To be an advocate, to go to the governor, to go to the city council, to go to the president of the United States and say, we need change. And that's also the role of Catholic Charities, and every good Catholic is called to be of service and of justice.
We're going to talk more about that. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to our show. Our issue is Catholic Charities, and we're talking with Brian Corbin. Brian, we ended by talking about justice, and you used the term about transforming. How important is it for us to be transformed or changed when we look at the needs that are all around us?
Well, great question. The first thought that came to my mind, just as you said that, was going back to Scripture for a second. And I was going to mention this Scripture in an earlier segment, but I decided not to, but perfect. There's this powerful story of Lazarus and Dives. I believe it's in Luke, Gospel of Luke, I think it's Luke 16, where literally every day Lazarus is at the gates of this mansion, and Dives, the wealthy man, who's really not named, basically steps over him to get to his house. and even the dogs get the crumbs. Even Lazarus can't get the crumbs. And so at the end of the story, Lazarus dies in the bosom of Abraham, and Dives dies, and basically yells out to Abraham and Lazarus, please tell me, how can I save me? And if you can't save me, go tell my brothers. I have 5 brothers. Go tell them. So they behave. They see Lazarus at the gate. And Abraham calls back and says, hey, I've sent all the prophets. I've told you over and over again. I even sent even if I sent a son and be killed, you'd kill him for telling you this. John Paul II used that story when he visited the United States for the first time back in 1986. And he used that story at Yankee Stadium on his first visit to the U.S., basically telling the first world that we have Lazarus everywhere, and we're acting like Dives sometimes. And basically called us to open our mind and to be in solidarity with people. Look at the common good, but also look at solidarity. And I think that's kind of what transformation means. So I have to be in solidarity as a church here in the United States with a church in the Middle East or in Africa or in Latin America. But I also have to be in solidarity with the people right next door. And I think that's the key issue.
And the interesting thing about that story in the gospel that you mentioned is that one of the few times where Jesus gives a name to an individual and to the poor person. So bringing that a step further, how important is that for us to name the people that are in need? They're not a faceless crowd.
Exactly.
They're brothers and sisters. They're all part of who we are.
They're not numbers. They're not client numbers. And I think that's where our hope is as Catholic Charities to serve people professionally. Some people need some professional help, but that's not the real point of Catholic Charities. The real point of Catholic Charities is what Deus Caritas Est says by Pope Benedict, to organize love. And I think that's a powerful motif, that our job is to help organize people of goodwill and Catholics to respond in love. So from a very practical volunteer level to giving, we're all part of organized love.
And let's go back to that volunteer level. Volunteers have been an important part in the life of any institution, and in particular in the church. And with Catholic Charities, how are volunteers used in the organization to help meet those particular needs?
Sure. There's a couple levels. One, let's take the governance level. We have 5 separate corporations that the bishop's the chairman of all 5 of them. And those corporations need boards of directors. And each board has approximately 15 people on the board, plus or take a couple people. So right now, we have about 50 to 60 people every year that serve on our corporations who actually give their talent, their time, their treasure to help us make good strategic decisions. To go back to an earlier question, how do we decide who comes first or what's our priority? That's the group that does it. They help us think through that. So governance is one level. Second level is we have people who actually help out at a semi-professional level. An example, we have this woman in one of our counties that is fluent in Arabic. And we've been recently receiving more claims of people in immigration who are Arabic speaking. And so she was a client once, and the way that she's wanted to give back to us is she knew that we didn't have the language skill. So she's a professionally trained linguist. She has some credentials in the field. And so she's actually giving us a couple hours a month to translate documents for us. Incredible. Just an incredible gift. And she happens to be a Christian who speaks Arabic, but just incredible. Another level is we have a program in Portage County, just to be specific for a moment, but it heightens the deal, where we have a drop. It's called a Caritas Cafe. We're open from like 8 in the morning till noon, and that's the best time we've figured out, where people can come to one of our sites and just literally have a cup of coffee and sit and talk to people. There's no programming. There's nothing going on. We have some food in the back if people need it. We have a computer back there for people to look at their benefit bank or stuff like that. And all it is it's a free will. They can put a dime, they can put $1, they can put nothing in for a cup of coffee. We have a parish that their ministry is to supply the cookies, make the coffee. Actually, they buy the coffee for us, and just have people present every morning from 8 to noon just being there. And so it's a great way. If they don't have to do much, they just have to talk and have a cup of coffee and make cookies, and it's a great ministry. So there are multiple levels, from a semi-professional to a downright just being there to governance, and they're all important.
And I think that brings us to another point that we all have a particular gift. We all have something that we can contribute to be charitable in this greater and larger organization. Which brings me to, I think, another question, and that's money. You know, we always have to come down to that because money obviously helps to make the things happen. And what's the whole money aspect in Catholic Charities, at least here nationally in the United States?
Sure. And I think, well, part of it I can give a really big snapshot, but then you have to go to each local agency to get a better shot. In general, I'll just use our budget for an example. About 30% of our income comes from government contracts. So we may do housing with HUD. We have a contract for homeless outreach. We have a contract for prison reentry. We have a contract for food delivery. So that's about 30% of our budget. Another 30% comes from the bishop's appeal. So every year, as you know, at least here in the Diocese of Youngstown, and I think most dioceses have some type of bishop's appeal for church and charity or charity itself. That funds about another 30% of what we have. And then the other 30% is literally foundations, trusts, bequest wills, a lot of foundations that we tap into for those other ministries that government won't pay for or can't pay for. And then we have those restricted monies from foundations. And then we have the church money, which allows us to be the flexible. It matches the other money. It brings in other money. Right now, we basically, for every $1 a Catholic gives, we can bring in $4 of government and foundations. So it's a nice gain. It's a nice gain for the whole community. Everyone wins. Other dioceses will have those 30, 30, 30. Might be a little different configured. It might be 50%, 20, 20, whatever. So I think nationally it's really government, bishops, local Catholic money, and philanthropy. So that's kind of the mix of the monies.
You know, I'm going back to the scriptures and the Acts of the Apostles, and we hear it every Easter where, and you had mentioned it, where all of these gifts of the people were laid at the feet of the apostles. And so there's this equal distribution that took place. How well are we doing with that equal distribution of our wealth, of the church's wealth, in meeting the needs of people?
Good. Well, I think if you look at it from a financial perspective, what we're doing for the monies collected for the bishop's appeal for our diocese, we see more affluent counties raising more money, which would be the assumption, and less affluent counties not raising as much money. And so what we are, through our board structures, we're able to kind of make sure that there's kind of a nice, I don't want to say equality, but equity. So we try the best we can. So some of the wealthier communities are subsidizing the poor communities. And let me go back to a point in Scripture. St. Paul wrote a letter to the Corinthians saying, I'm coming in a couple weeks. By the way, he was going to Galatia, and he basically said, I'm going to be going your way, and when I stop in Corinth, would you please have a collection ready so I don't have to spend time on this? Because I'm going to bring the money back to Jerusalem where they're suffering. So right from St. Paul, he's doing a bishop's appeal. And I'm sure the people in Corinth and in Galatia are going, why should we give a dime to Jerusalem? I'm sure they had that conversation, but obviously they did. Because Jerusalem continued. So I think there's an old deep spirit about we do have to share our gifts. And we do the best we can to equitably distribute. Is it perfect? It never will be. But I think there's attempts, that's why we need those key volunteers at board level to really give us insights on how best to do that.
How does the element of hope factor into all this? Because in a world that is so lacking of that virtue, what does Catholic Charities do to give people hope?
Great idea. Great. Well, first of all, let's go back and say hope is one of the three theological virtues: faith, hope, and love. So in faith, we're based on our Catholic identity. We do this because you're our neighbor. We see Jesus in each other. When you did it to the least of these, you did it to me. That's our faith. Our love is that as Jesus gave himself up in self-sacrifice and in service, we too are called to love in the same way. Hope is basically allowing someone to say they're not alone. And I guess going to a story, that might give a little bit of again, our tagline is providing service, giving hope. So there may be times, quite honestly, when someone calls a Catholic Charities agency and has a problem. And they may think the answer is a $500 check. And it may be. But sometimes an agency can't give the $500 check. Maybe we can give the $200 check. But something else happens in that transaction. When our staff are trained, and we really push this, they're talking to a person, not a number. They're talking to a person, not a client. They're talking to a person. As we hear people's stories, try to say, well, maybe it's not the $500 you need. Maybe you need the $200, but maybe we need to get you to another system, another process, another event that will help you get to that other stage. So all of a sudden, a person who was so trapped in what they were thinking was the answer, all of a sudden has new answers or new possibilities, one level. I've been in a situation where literally someone has called me and very angry about something, very nervous, very scared, and obviously when you push it, they're scared about something. And literally by the end of a 40-minute conversation, the person literally said, I just needed to get it off my chest. I didn't want anything from you. I just wanted someone to listen. And you've given me hope that things will change or whatever the situation was. And it's happened over and over again where people feel that. So I think, and the third level is we have a larger faith community that basically says, we believe in the resurrection. We believe in the good news. There is hope. There is light and not darkness. And I think just that kind of spirit allows people to say, it's even though we not give you the $500, there are other vistas that we might help you with.
Well, and I think that brings us to that whole idea is that Catholic Charities is more than just money.
Right.
It's more than just handouts. It's actually listening to people. It's respecting people. It's giving people hope. And those elements are just they're priceless, actually.
Right.
In closing, what would you like to share briefly with the folks that are with us, what they could do to better understand Catholic Charities and how they're part of it?
Sure. A couple things. So always, wherever diocese you're in, or if you're in our diocese, go to our website, CCDOY, Catholic Charities, Diocese of Youngstown, ccdoy.org. Look at what we do, look at opportunities, volunteer opportunities, events. We have all kinds of fundraising events that, like we have this thing called Men Who Cook, which we bring men chefs in different counties, and they have to cook, and we judge them, and we give them money if they have to raise money. And it's just a fun thing. So even just coming to one of those events to kind of see what they could do would be one thing. If you're interested in serving on a board, tell a Catholic Charities leader in any diocese that you're in, or here in Youngstown. If you want to do some direct service, maybe if you come to Catholic Charities for a request to be part of that, we might not have a particular slot for you, but we know the other religious orders and the other agencies sponsored by the church that are working great, so we can at least connect you with them as well, if need be. And, ultimately, donating is very important. That's a very important part of who we are as a people. That's how sometimes people talk, is through gifts. But even just praying for us, praying for a client, even just saying, okay, give me someone to pray for this month. And I can give you a bunch of case studies that I won't give you names, but I could give you first names and say, please pray for Romero this week.
Brian Corbin, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you very much, Father Jim.
And thank you for being with us. Have a good day, and God be with you.
Profiles and Issues was a production of CTNY, the Catholic Television Network of Youngstown. Your program host was Father James Korda.